I'm Seth Grimes, at least for a little bit more, the Maryland organizer at the Washington Area Bicyclist Association, covering as Maryland organizer Prince George's and Montgomery counties and working on state relationships and legislation. Peter?
I'm Peter Gray. For those of you who might not know me, I wear a few different hats. I'm WABA's Montgomery County organizer. I'm also the chair of the board of Bike Maryland. And Callie?
Hey, good evening, everybody. I'm Callie Crumpos. I'm the advocacy director at WABA, and I'm thrilled to be here with everybody.
See, our colleague Kevin is here also, so let's give him a shot.
Sure. Kevin O'Brien, Virginia organizer at WABA, covering Alexandria, Arlington, Fairfax County, but mostly just here to listen in to the extent that there are opportunities to collaborate, learn from what y'all are doing. Definitely, want to make sure that I'm picking up all the good stuff and learning from the good stuff y'all are doing in Maryland.
Actually, Callie is why don't we get started? And Callie is the advocacy director. Maybe you could speak to the splash slide that people should be seeing on the screen about WABA, then hand it over to me.
Sure. Well, maybe just as a quick intro for those that don't know us, WABA does much more than advocacy. Advocacy itself is a big job, but you can see here our mission statement. We are really working to empower people to ride bikes, build connections, and transform places. And we do that by hosting classes, arranging rides, and of course, engaging our community members in connecting with those in power. In that work, we are thinking about how do we make biking better, but also how are we expanding options for getting around and for recreation. So thinking about biking, walking, and transit.
So as Peter mentioned, Senator Jeff Waldstreicher, who is Vice Chair of Judicial Proceedings, will join us at around 8 o'clock. We have some slides to show you and material to present to you until then. So Peter and I will tag team on that. And we welcome your putting questions in. You can use the chat for that if you wish. And feel free to introduce yourself via the chat if you wish to do that. It'd be great to know who you are, if you're with an organization, where you are, anything you care to say would be cool. So Callie's introduced WABA, and why are we here? This is a screen from Zero Deaths Maryland, which is a Maryland website that shows traffic fatalities broken out by categories of people, broken out by the counties and the city of Baltimore in Maryland. You will see that year to date in 2024, well, until December 2nd, when I created this slide, we had 129 fatalities in Prince George's and Montgomery counties together. That is, I believe, about 50% more than the number of homicides in those two counties. This is a leading source of road carnage. Prince George's in particular has the worst record in the state of Maryland, and those fatalities and serious injuries are heavily dominated by state roads, which are the largest, fastest roads in all of the counties. And it's our imperative to do something about it, not only to create more bikeable ways of getting around, but to create safer streets for everyone. What's our mission here, and how does it relate to the state and state legislation? Here's an image from Prince George's County from Landover Road, Maryland 202. It's 3 lanes at this point with an exit lane and a rather sorry bike lane here with traffic crossing the bike lane at 50 miles an hour. And you can see to the right on that photo, begin right turn lane, yield to bikes, it actually says, and it's obscured by foliage. It would be crazy to bicycle in that bike lane. We want to fix that by remaking state roads. We also have conditions like this photo shows from Bethesda, where we have a cycle track and we have a vehicle parked in it. So we can address this by working with the counties and the municipalities, but also with the state. So as we'll discuss in a few minutes, one of the bills that we have gotten introduced, that will be introduced in the 2025 legislative session, is one that makes it illegal to stop, stand, or park a motor vehicle in a bike lane or cycle track. And we have other bills. We can call this part of WABA's Complete State Roads Initiative. State roads are the most dangerous in Maryland, and complete streets, that principle says that roads should be safe for everyone. So you'll see links here to reports that we created for each of the two counties that talk about the state context for making improvements on state roads. And in particular, state legislation is part of these initiatives. We do work with Bike Maryland in pursuit of state legislation. I'm going to turn it over to Peter Gray now to talk to the next couple of slides to talk about the state legislative calendar, which, so far as we're concerned, has already started a few months ago. Peter.
So thank you, Seth. As Seth said, advocates from WABA, from Bike Maryland, from other organizations have already been having discussions with state senators and delegates about various bills. This slide shows out the actual significant dates within the Maryland legislative session starting on January 8th, 2025. You can see that at a certain point, the governor introduces a budget. That's the one thing that by constitution, the state legislature has to approve a balanced budget by the end of the session. There are deadlines on the 17th, 3rd, and 7th for introducing bills in order to have them progress further within the Senate or the House of Delegates. Governor Moore will deliver a State of the State address sometime early in February. And for us, the most important date here, or at least one of the most important dates, is February 11th, where Bike Maryland will hold its annual symposium in Annapolis. We invite all of you, hopefully within the next several days, there will be a link sent out both on the webpage and into your email boxes, allowing you to register for that symposium. And on that day, we will have some informative speakers. We will go over the list of bills that Bike Maryland is prioritizing, a pretty short list, maybe 4 or 5 different bills. And we will set up for all the registrants meetings with your delegates and senators' offices, usually with staff. On the odd occurrence, the actual delegate or senator does show up. And we will have the initial part of the symposium in Annapolis City Hall from about 8:30 to 11:30. Then we'll walk over to the State House, do some lobbying for a couple hours, and then meet hopefully at a restaurant afterwards to schmooze and sort of share notes on how those meetings went. March 17th is very significant because if a bill has not passed one chamber or the other, it'll be dead. And then April 7th is the last day of the session, sine die. The last couple weeks of the session are usually a very hectic time. Throughout this time, particularly in January and February and bleeding into March, there will be committee hearings that the bills that we are prioritizing will be heard, hopefully in both the House and the Senate. We will be looking for folks to come and give testimony either in person or, if they're permitting it, virtually, but also written testimony will be helpful. And there'll be a couple of occasions where both WABA and Bike Maryland will be reaching out to advocates to say, hey, call your delegates and senator about XYZ bill, particularly if they're on a specific committee. That'll be very relevant, and maybe before a floor vote on either the House or the Senate. So that's all the sort of the layout of the session. And if you have questions about this, please put them in the chat and one of us will address them. You want to go to the next slide? There we go. So what are the bills that we are focused on? And this is a sort of a so far, there might be additions, subtractions before the session starts, and certainly during the session. The situation is very fluid. Bills rise and fall sort of on a moment's notice. But this is the list of bills that we are currently focused on, and I'll go over them one by one. Number one, bike safety yield or stop as yield, or otherwise known as Idaho stop, for the first state to actually pass such a bill. This allows cyclists to treat stop signs as yield signs. And in fact, finally, the federal government has issued guidance from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. I think it was last year, the year before, basically saying, yes, this may not be intuitive, but this is the safest way for bicyclists to proceed throughout the road universe. Basically, you're approaching a stop sign, maybe at the same time as a car right behind you or beside you. It's better that you should be able to proceed if there is no cross traffic, to stay ahead of the car in order to be more visible. Many, many crashes take place in intersections. A lot of times cars making a right or a left will not see the bike. And so being able to treat these stop signs as yield is something that is safer. There's data from the state of Delaware, which passed such a law a couple of years ago, that showed a reduction of crashes. This is something that also is the state of the law in the District of Columbia. And it also happens to follow the practice of many cyclists anyway. So this is something that we got through the House of Delegates with very, very little resistance, but it kind of ground to a halt in the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee. We have had a conversation with the committee chair, Will Smith, who actually was last year and will be this year a sponsor of this bill. And he has promised us that this bill will be brought forward as early in the session as possible. So that's bike safety yield. Bikes on sidewalks, for those of us in Montgomery County, this has not really been an issue because the county has proactively created a policy of allowing bikes on sidewalks in almost every sidewalk in the county. The default right now is that the state law says it is illegal to ride your bike on a sidewalk, which is kind of crazy because people are riding bikes on sidewalks because it's safer than riding the street, and we should be encouraging that kind of activity. This bill will flip that default and say that it is legal to bike everywhere in the state on a sidewalk unless the local jurisdiction creates carve-outs like certain central business districts or whatever. So this is something that would make it a lot safer for people biking on sidewalks and would give a signal to the enforcement authorities that they don't need to be prosecuting this kind of activity. Number three, as Seth mentioned earlier with the picture of the car parked in a bike lane, there's a bill that will create a prohibition on vehicles stopping, standing, or parking in bike lanes. This is something that we had hoped to get passed last year as part of the Better Bus Act. It was taken out of the bill during the session, and so this is a standalone bill that will create what we hope is a safer experience for people who are riding in bike facilities. Bicycle Head Start, this is a new bill that will allow a bicyclist to go through an intersection when the pedestrian walk signal is illuminated. So if you're at the corner of Colesville Road and Fenton Street and a walk sign goes on, instead of having to wait for the cars to start going, just like with the bike safety yield, you'll be able to get ahead of the cars. The pedestrians are walking. Why shouldn't the bikes be able also to keep going through the intersection and get a bit of a head start on those cars. So that will be true wherever there are leading pedestrian intervals or pedestrian walk signals at an intersection. Number 5, this is something that we're revisiting again. Last year, this electric bike rebate and voucher program was proposed. It didn't make any progress in either house. Delegate Robin Lewis from Baltimore City is proposing it again with a very modest $100,000 worth of funding because of the dire straits that the state transportation budget is in. We hope that it'll make more progress this year. These programs, have been wildly popular. DC has a $500,000 bike voucher program that it started last year. That was, I think 98% of those funds have been dispersed within the first year of that program. That program and this program will be very heavily weighted towards a means test so that people who have the least amount of ability to buy these bikes will be the ones who are the greatest beneficiary of these vouchers. Number 6, this is another sort of repeat. The State Highway Administration proposed this last year and it's bringing it back. This will allow State Highway to reduce speed limits by 5 miles an hour on urban state highways without undergoing a costly and time-intensive traffic and engineering investigation study. So we hope that this will get a better reception this year. It's sort of a no-brainer. Cars should be going slower on state highways that are going through urban contexts. State Highway Administration recognizes this and wants to do everything that they can to lower speeds on these streets. And this act will give them another tool with which to do that. Transportation and Climate Alignment Act. This is another bill that last year sort of sailed through the House and then sort of ran aground. Well, actually, that's not true. Came within one vote of passing the Senate. The Transportation and Climate Alignment Act will require projects over $100 million that are new road projects to create mitigations or offsets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled. So if a project is proposed in the budget and it's over $100 million, the State Highway Administration or whoever's doing this project, MDTA, would have to create mitigation strategies such as increased access to transit, enhanced efforts on bike infrastructure to sort of offset the climate impact of those new projects. It will force the state agencies to measure the impacts of these new projects and then to create corresponding mitigation strategies in order to create offsets of that carbon increase. And then number 8 is a local speed bill. There are two local bills here. MC 125 will allow Montgomery County to reduce speed limits without a costly traffic study. And MC 425 will authorize the creation of stop sign cameras in certain places in Montgomery County. This is something that was passed as a local bill in Prince George's County last year. And those cameras at stop signs are going up in certain instances. It is really important, given the level of scofflaw behavior at stop signs, to create another enforcement mechanism to deter people from just running stop signs. So I want to go through the chat. There's a question about the voucher program, and yes, Sean, it's going to be means tested. I think that the emphasis is going to be on providing this benefit, particularly to people who are already getting food stamps or other public benefits that they're getting. And in fact, DC's program basically has only been going to those kinds of recipients. I think the reason, Susan, that we think that this is a good idea is because electric bikes in particular have served as a car substitute for everybody who's been able to purchase them. They are quite expensive, and we think that a lot of people who don't have the means would be willing to purchase them and use them, and therefore have less reason to have the much greater cost of maintaining and operating a motor vehicle, a car. So that's the reason that we are backing that bill. Yeah, and as Phil points out, Denver's program has been very successful. The DC program is very successful. I think Baltimore City has just started a much lower funded program, but I think they're getting a lot of good reception with it. And I think that it's something that we need to look into for locally in Montgomery and Prince George's County, but we hope that the state, by doing this, if this actually passes, will encourage other local jurisdictions to proceed with their own programs that can be tailored to the needs of their residents. Any other questions that people have? There are some other local bills that will be coming up during the session, but this is really, these 8 are kind of the excuse me, the highlights. One thing that is not on this list, which still could come up, well, there are 2 things. One, last year, a bill, the Sarah Demick Langenkamp bill, was passed, and that created enhanced penalties for drivers who hit bikes in a bike lane. It actually brought it into line with similar issues with anybody who hits somebody in a school crosswalk. Basically, the idea is that if you kill or seriously injure somebody in this manner with your car, you shouldn't be able to just walk away with a fine and maybe some community service, as happened with the driver who killed Sarah Langenkamp. This will allow for penalties up to 2 months of incarceration. There is a vulnerable road user law already, which created the necessity for somebody involved in such a crash as a driver to actually make a court appearance. It used to be that they could get off with just a ticket. This will enhance that penalty and will basically serve as a marker for the citizens of the state, the drivers in the state, that the Justice system is going to react to such a unlawful harm or killing with a penalty that actually has a little more teeth to it. Let's see. Daniel's asking about number 7.
Wonder if Lindsay Mendelson, who's on the call, would like to address that point.
Lindsay?
Sorry, is this in the chat?
Yeah, it says any way to leverage the anti-climate trend of recent national politics to build the case for the TCA as even more reason climate action is needed at the state level.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, that we need to be doing even more at the state level, and especially in light of what's happened nationally. So yeah, it's a great point.
I'm sorry, Lindsay is with the Maryland Sierra Club.
and is doing a lot of great work on building support for the Transportation Climate Alignment Act. And in this instance, Bike Maryland and WABA are involved, supporting this not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because it is creating alliances with groups, unions, environmental groups that that we all need to be on the same page, and it has heightened the conversation amongst this whole group of people that active transportation as well as access transit needs to be part of the conversation in terms of addressing the climate crisis and also acting as a mitigating factor for any new projects that the state undertakes.
If you don't mind, let me Dan Pascal put in a follow-up question on e-bikes. Let me field that and mention that there are other bills that are not mentioned here. There's one under development initiated by the Public Defender's Office in Baltimore. It's called the Safer Traffic Stops for All bill that WABA will likely support, that addresses police traffic enforcement for low-level infractions. Another possibility is reform of Maryland's contributory negligence bill, which says that if you are 1% at fault in a collision, then it's as if you were 100% at fault. But that's pending, no bill there yet. I want to say that Peter, Callie, and I met just 2 days ago with Montgomery County Executive Mark Elrich, and one of our topics was Montgomery County e-bike voucher rebate bill. We've had other discussions with Prince George's County about county bills. Funding on these things is always a problem. It's unlikely that the Maryland bill will pass this year either because of the very poor fiscal situation, the lack of funding for things that are existing programs, not even new programs. So we're looking at a lot of different models. There's no model yet, but one thing that we would pursue with the county programs is subsidies for regular bikes, especially used for transportation purposes as opposed to recreation. But again, we'd want to look at income qualifications. We're also working at the county level on bike share expansion, which gives a low-cost entry point for bicycling to people who might not own a bike or who want to use bicycles, bike share to supplement as a last mile, whatever, for transit trips and all of that kind of stuff.
Regarding the e-bikes, I don't know if you know the answer to this, Seth. I'm not sure that there are designated shops. I know in the DC instance, they are requiring people to buy them at bike shops in the District of Columbia. I think that if we had a Montgomery County bill, we would follow that same model in order to support our local bike shops. But as far as statewide, I assume you have to buy one in the state, but otherwise, I don't know if there's any.
It's not articulated to that point yet. Well, let's move on to talk about the most immediate thing, which is local bills. We have a slide for Montgomery County and then one for Prince George's. Local bills are state bills, changes to state law that apply only to a single county. There are also bi-county local bills for Montgomery and Prince George's since MNC-PPC is a bi-county planning agency. We're calling out two in particular that Peter mentioned on the last slide. The hearing, the Montgomery County delegation hearing, is this Monday evening. WABA will be testifying. One of them, MC 1-25, would allow speed limit reduction without an engineering and traffic investigation. So, for instance, the District of Columbia a number of years ago lowered its residential interior street speed limits to 20 miles an hour. We want to be able to do that kind of reduction on an area-wide basis without having to do a study for every single street, which is onerous, costly, time-consuming, and so on. So this bill will likely pass the delegation. It passed the House of Delegates last year, except it got caught up in the Senate. So we're supporting that. And then Peter mentioned a new bill, MC 425, stop sign camera authorization. That would be near schools. Prince George's County had a local bill in 2024 that passed that was precipitated by the deaths of a 5-year-old and a 10-year-old near Riverdale Park Elementary School hit by a motor vehicle. And so this allows for stop sign cameras, an additional layer of enforcement. Of course, we know that enforcement is no substitute for better, safe infrastructure. So we do work on that also. So the hearing is Monday evening. After that, the local delegation, Montgomery County senators and House of Delegates members will discuss these in committees and then vote on them. We expect both bills and another one that Delegate Jared Solomon has introduced for directing the use of speed camera fine money for safety improvements and allowing speed camera installation on high-risk routes. We expect that to pass also, and then the question is whether they'll get through the full General Assembly. And then we'll call out a particular bill for Prince George's County. This will be, I believe, the third year this is introduced, that would allow for graduated speed camera fines on Indian Head Highway, Maryland 210, in southern Prince George's County. There have been 93 road fatalities on this one road since 2007. 93 fatalities on one road. I believe it's 7.2-mile stretch. I saw that Ron Weiss is on the call. I don't know if you have anything to add. This will be introduced by Delegate Chris Valderrama, who represents a district in southern Prince George's. And it would institute much steeper fines based on the speed of the vehicle that has been caught by a speed camera. So again, enforcement is not going to make the roads safer directly. We want safer infrastructure, but enforcement, especially in the form of penalties that inflict a bit more pain, can only help.
Right now, it's a $40 fine, whether you're going 12 miles over the speed limit or you're going 50 miles over the speed limit, which does happen on that road. And so I think it's important to sort of send a signal to those drivers that the fine should be much greater, and hopefully the incentive to not speed is greater. I'll note that there are deadlines for testifying at these hearings. For the Prince George's County one, the deadline is tomorrow. I think for the Montgomery County one, it's Saturday. So if you're interested in submitting testimony, you should register before those deadlines.
Yes.
Ron, did you have something to add?
I call support.
Okay, we are quite happy, Peter, me, Callie, to discuss legislation with you if you want to send us a note. Easiest is to write advocacy@waba.org. And we do very much want to work with people in lobbying your own legislators and then via the Bike Maryland Lobby Day and so on. And we'll train people to the extent we can. Al Carr has weighed in the chat about a loophole about speeders driving a rental car. So Al is a former legislator himself. And yeah, it's always a challenge to draft the legislation to cover the full intent of what you want to cover. So there you go. Why don't we continue on? And Delegate Waldstreicher should be joining us soon, I hope, and we'll be able to field questions for you. Peter, you already talked about the Bike Maryland Symposium. I don't know if there's anything you want to add there.
I'm here, Seth.
Oh, you are,
Jeff.
Okay, so let's go back, and so I am very glad to introduce Senator Jeff Waldstreicher, who represents District 18 in Montgomery County, and who is the Vice President of the Judicial Proceedings Committee. And so we have suggested that he can talk about the 2025 legislative outlook, the very difficult state budget situation, about legislation that he is working on himself, and then field questions. And I'm going to stop the share so that you can be on the screen if you wish to. And Senator, please take it away.
Well, thank you, Seth. Thanks to Peter Gray for the invitation tonight. As we go full screen here, I see so many constituents in my legislative district, Allison, and of course my former colleague and good friend, Delegate Al Carr. So thank you all for being here, but special kudos to District 18 constituents who are joining us here this evening. My understanding is that earlier in this evening, there was a little bit about legislative procedure. I know everyone kind of thinks, from 11th grade, they know how a bill becomes a law, but the internal culture of Annapolis is very strange. And I've been there now going on 19 years, so I'm used to it by this point, but it wasn't so long ago that I was new, and I remember that feeling of not quite understanding the jargon and all the procedure. To the extent that tonight you are getting both procedural advice and substantive advice about the bills that will come in front of the legislature next session that you care deeply about. The procedural advice is actually the more important because I think we're all on board with increasing safety in our community, bicycle safety, pedestrian safety, road safety, but it's really the nuance of the bills and the procedure by which they move through the process that is the more critical of the two sides. So for those of you for whom that is new stuff, look to good folks like Seth and Peter, Al, and Allison, folks who know the legislative process really well, because it is fairly unique and a little bit challenging. But once you master it, you feel kind of like a magician, like, oh, I know how to pass bills now. And it really is a deeply empowering feeling once you understand all the kind of committee procedures and weird kind of cultural issues that occur in Annapolis. Let me start with a quick budget preview. It's not going to be pretty, and then we can talk a little bit about some of the bills that Seth referenced, as well as a couple other pieces of legislation. First, this will almost certainly be the hardest legislative session that I've had in those 19 years when it comes to our budget. So, and I went through the Great Recession, right? After 2008, 2009, as the economy was cratering, and of course, Maryland and Montgomery County specifically get a lot of their revenue from the property tax, and that was all created. That was really difficult, and it was challenging. We had to make really difficult decisions about what to fund. My understanding from my colleagues who sit on the appropriations and budget and tax committees is that this is going to be even worse. And these structural issues are not coming from the recent election or the federal government. It's coming from a hole that we've really dug ourselves here in Annapolis. And so we're going to have to figure out a way out of it. That process is just beginning. So I don't have any specific intel I can give you in terms of how the budget issue will be solved, but we know that it'll certainly be a combination that includes slowing down some of the investments that we're making. And I imagine that will include investments in roads, investment in bike infrastructure, investment in transit, all of those things. If it's new, it will almost certainly be delayed. If it's in process, for example, the Purple Line or some of the bike infrastructure that I know you guys care deeply about, it will likely continue to be funded. And so that includes a lot of stuff. The Baltimore Red Line, which is really important to a lot of folks in the Baltimore City region and that I support, that will likely get delayed. The American Legion Bridge will likely get delayed. So if it hasn't started yet, the likelihood of delay is very high. A lot of money for bike infrastructure and other traffic safety improvements that the county utilizes, and for those of you who live in municipalities, that your municipalities use, comes from the state. It's called transportation user money, and it flows directly from the state to the county or to the municipalities. But during the Great Recession, that was one of the first cuts we made. And looking back on that, that was a terrible mistake. My hope is that we don't repeat it. But for those who are looking at our budget situation, just know that last time the instinct was to go after this local money. And a lot of this local money is important resources for so many of the infrastructure issues that we care about. So I will fight that. But I'm pretty honest that these are going to be really difficult times, and there are no easy solutions to our budget challenges. I keep in touch with Seth and Peter, and so don't consider this the only meeting. It's December. These decisions will get finalized in late March or early May. I believe the Senate is moving first on the budget this year, so please don't hesitate to to check in with me. Seth and Peter both have my cell, my personal cell. Everyone here is welcome to use it, but there's not going to be radio silence and then you'll get surprised in March, like, hey, there's all these cuts. My hope is to keep you apprised along the way. Let's talk about a couple big issues that will come before us. One was referenced earlier, which is this issue of graduated traffic fines. And I think this is one of the most important things we can do. Seth, you referenced it with regards to Prince George's County and Indian Head Highway, which is almost certainly one of the most deadly roads that's not officially a highway in Maryland. But there's also going to be a statewide bill, and Vaughn Stewart, who's been such a champion on bicycle issues in the House, and I are introducing it. I'm the sponsor on the Senate side. Many of you recall that a couple of years ago, there was a terrible crash in a work zone outside of Baltimore, and a number of people passed away in that accident. And under the leadership of Lieutenant Governor Aruna Miller, we last year implemented or passed and are now implementing legislation to have graduated fines in work zones. And as Seth indicated, what that means is the faster you go, the higher the fine. And at lower levels, it's a reasonable fine. At higher levels, where the speeding is outlandish and reckless and dangerous, the fines become punitive. And so that is only true in work zones. But what we realized is, hey, if this works in work zones, we can start to apply this statewide to other traffic cameras. It was important to me and to Vaughn that at the entry level ticket, which is at 12 miles per hour above the speed limit, that the fine remain the same. We didn't want anyone to think that we're jacking up fines designed to increase revenue or create a punitive situation. So people should not be going more than 12 miles per hour over the speed limits, but if they are, their fine will remain the same. But at higher levels, above 20, above 30, above 40, the fines start to get steeper, and they are tied directly to the work zone fines that we passed last session. And so, I think we have created new legislation that has intellectual consistency with what we did last year. And as you might have heard in the previous presentation, it's always easier to amend previous legislation than to introduce new legislation. And in fact, that takes us to the safety stop. I support the safety stop. I think it's the right thing to do. And I've seen data that so many of you have shown me that indicate that the safety stop is much safer. At the same time, it is a new idea. And, as we talked about just a second ago with the fines, new ideas are much harder than extending ideas that have already been implemented. So the safety stop is, I think, a really heavy lift because it is counterintuitive and because it's an idea that hasn't been implemented in Maryland. I know it's been implemented in other states and has done so successfully. So I think the summary here, and I want to take your questions because listening is really the most important part of my job, is the budget is going to be dominant and it will be tough and it will impact the priorities that we have here. But even as we're doing that, we have the opportunity to make progress on road safety, on bicycle infrastructure, and on so many of the other important things that WABA values.
Maybe we can have people raise hands and then we'll call on you for your questions.
And to the extent that there are any questions from earlier that deal with kind of cultural issues, why do you do it like this with testimony? Or why do you only sit on one committee? I'm happy to answer those questions as well.
Well, in that regard, Jeff, can you say something about what the procedure is? I don't know if you know what it's going to be in the House, but in the Senate, is testimony only going to be in person, or will hearings be hybrid, like in front of your committee?
Yeah, so on the Senate side, I think in-person testimony is much preferred, but we allow for virtual testimony. If you are testifying virtually, you generally testify last in the procedure. And so I think there is strong advantages to coming in person. I know Annapolis is a challenge to get to. It's certainly a challenge to get to on bicycle. But I encourage in-person testimony. So by rule, virtual testimony is welcome. By culture, in-person testimony is more highly valued.
You have a question from Ron Weiss. Will your speed camera fine bill start fines at the current $40 or at $60?
I think whatever the current is, which I think is $40. And like I mentioned, I think it was important to the House sponsor and I both that the starting point remain the same, that people who are just a little bit over the speed limit can learn their lesson without a punitive speed limit. But it will escalate as the speed above the speed limit gets more extreme, 40 miles per hour above the speed limit, the fine will get more extreme.
So, well, let me ask you a question. How can people be effective advocates with you and with your colleagues to get attention to their bills, to get positive votes in committee? How can people be effective advocates?
That's a really good question. Thank you, Seth, for that question. So there are many ways to contact your legislator, but the most effective way is always to set up an in-person meeting, because in-person meetings show that you have taken time out of your schedule to make a sacrifice and either come to Annapolis or in your own community meet with your legislator. So in-person meetings, hey, Allison, sometimes says, hey, can we meet over coffee, or can we talk for 10 minutes? Of course, I would love to. And that makes a really big difference. In-person testimony on the bills is important. And for the reason we described before. In general, written testimony that is not accompanied by oral testimony is not viewed as a powerful way to contact your legislator. And so if you submit written testimony through our system, it might get read. I work hard to read the testimony, but it can sometimes be overwhelming. And sometimes if a bill has a lot of testimony, or if we're just busy on other stuff, written testimony does not get read. If you write your legislator, using your own language is more powerful than using a form letter. So form letters I see and I read them, but I move through them quickly. But if an email starts, hey, Jeff, I met you when you knocked on my door and we talked about this, and your son goes to school with my daughter, and sometimes I see you at the 7-Eleven in Kensington, and here's what I think about the safety stop. That's going to be a lot more powerful than a form letter. So personal outreach is always going to be more powerful than generic outreach.
So I see Larry Stoller has a question. Larry, you want to come on?
Yeah, thank you. Senator, thank you so much. I've seen you speak so many times on cycling issues. Really appreciate all your support. I wanted to ask you about a little bit more about the safety yield legislation that a number of us worked on last year. I appreciate your comments. I mean, one of the nice things about that bill is not a budget bill, so it's something that hopefully we can get done. My delegate, Mark Corman, got the bill through his committee, and it passed, I think, the House overwhelmingly last year. And I know that Senator Smith ran out of time in your committee last year. We've talked to him, and he seems very committed to pushing this bill this year. And I know we have you as a supporter. My new senator, Senator Love, has told me she's going to support the bill. So I wanted to ask, what more can we do to help you get that bill passed? Because now that that's the law in the District of Columbia, and those of us who are cycling in DC, it's a completely different experience and feels much safer than it does here when we cross the border to come to Maryland. Thank you.
Yep. So yeah, it's a really good question. Let me start with kind of the cultural side, and then I'll talk about that specific bill. So Delegate Chairman Corman is a fantastic human being, a fantastic legislator, and a great chairman. His committee is called the Environment and Transportation Committee. And so transportation is really core to what they do. And so many of the bills that you guys care about are really part of the core portfolio of his committee. On the Senate side, we have 2 fewer committees and a third of the members. And so the committee jurisdiction doesn't overlap directly with the House jurisdiction. And that's why I'm speaking to you tonight. I sit on the Judicial Proceedings Committee, which has jurisdiction over rules of the road. But it also has jurisdiction over some really weighty issues like criminal justice reform and juvenile sex abuse and just a lot of very weighty issues, family law, divorce, things like that. And so, you know, I don't know how to say this diplomatically. I'll just say it candidly. Sometimes, and it's not intentional, and it doesn't go to values, but sometimes the transportation part of our portfolio is kind of like a side issue to the core of what we do, is these kind of life and death issues that come before us. And so we definitely ran out of time on the safety yield, as often happens. But part of the reason we ran out of time in front of us that, for example, environment and transportation didn't have. But that's not a criticism of us. It's not a criticism of them. It's just a structural difference. And so if you're wondering sometimes, like, how come we're not getting better purchase in front of the Judicial Proceedings Committee, I don't want you to think that your views are going unheard or that the values are not values that we share. It's just competing differently with other workload compared to how it's handled in the House or in some other. So I think that just going to the bill substantively, or procedurally rather, I think we'll just get started a little bit earlier this year, and that will allow us to work hard to avoid what happened last year. And I don't know if the bill has been pre-filed this year, but the earlier we begin, the greater chance that we have in not coming into conflict with other legislation. Listen, the counterintuitiveness of the substance of the bill, I think we can get over. But I think you guys know, like, it does take an intellectual leap to get there. You guys were just talking about a bill you support to give economic penalties to drivers who run stop signs. The same people who get a $40 ticket for running the stop sign will see a bicyclist running that same stop sign, who will be doing so not only with no ticket, but completely legally under the bill that you've proposed. And that's not insurmountable to me. I just want to be clear-eyed for those of folks on my committee who may not be bicyclists, who may not represent urban areas where this is more of an issue compared to rural areas. That kind of intellectual dissonance, it can be challenging to get over. And so I just want to be honest about the challenges ahead on that.
Let's see, Sean, you asked about enforcement reciprocity. Do you want to state your question yourself?
Sure, thanks, Seth. Yeah, I was asking if, or I was going to ask if there's any additional enforcement coming for those scofflaws you often see screenshots of on Twitter, where, or maybe on Blue Sky now, but where all the fees associated with a license plate might total hundreds or thousands of dollars. Very often, Maryland license plates on the DC system, but it's not uncommon to see it here too. I'm curious if additional enforcement mechanisms are being created that can bring scofflaws to justice, and if there would be any interest or any potential momentum in establishing some sort of reciprocity with the district to to protect divided communities like Tacoma Park.
I think that's a really great question. It's funny that Delegate Al Carr is here with me. Delegate Al Carr was formerly the chair of the Federal Relations Joint Committee, and I was, I think, either before or just after Al, but also the chair of that. And then, and what that committee deals with actually is interstate compacts, and these things get signed and then they are renewed on a certain basis. And so this needs to be done by compact, but I'm actually pretty shocked that it hasn't been done before. I got not a traffic ticket, but a parking ticket in Washington, D.C. because I got confused by the signs. I almost certainly will never have to pay that parking ticket. There's no consequences for me not doing so. I will, of course, but vice versa for DC folks in Maryland. That doesn't make any sense. We should easily, for safety reasons, be able to enforce against DC residents who are speeding on our roads, and they should be able to enforce against Maryland residents who are speeding on their roads. So the procedural mechanism to do that is a compact. I think that probably has to be done between the governor and the mayor, or between the two governors if you want to include Virginia. But it should be an easy thing to do, and it's the right thing to do.
I see Allison has her hand up. Allison, you want to ask a question?
Yeah. Hi, Jeff. Thanks for coming tonight. It's really great to get some insight into what a topic that we as advocates spend a lot of time discussing. Is written testimony worthwhile? Is in-person testimony more powerful? And I appreciate your candid words on that. I wonder if you could go a step further and tell us which parts of the state, being that I'm on the board of Bike Maryland, we're spending a lot of time with people all around the state. Which parts of the state do you think we could potentially activate? And what are some of the things that you hear your colleagues in other parts of Maryland say that are barriers to them understanding some of the laws that we are trying to pass here? Are there arguments that we can try to help make through their constituents? Are there differences in culture from county, from east to west of the state that you have noticed that you would like us to be aware of, that we can help you overcome in your work in the Senate?
That's a really great question, Allison. So the answer is exactly kind of what we talked about earlier tonight, which is it takes a little front end work, but being perceived as and being actually strategic is not as hard as you might think. So my committee has 11 members. And so you'll start to get a feeling about, let's say, the safety yield, who supports it and who doesn't. Well, when you guys plan your testimony, if you're getting a sense that a member might be on the fence, having constituents from that member's district is the most useful. And so I appreciate what you're saying, Allison. Maybe it's like, hey, we need to hear more from rural areas of the state, less from Montgomery County, or more from this or that. But actually, it has less to do with urban-rural divides and more of where do the members represent. So Larry, no offense to you, but if Allison comes to testify, I'm going to listen a little more closely to Allison than to you, Larry. And Larry, when you come to testify, Sarah Love, who almost certainly is going to sit on my committee, will listen more closely to you. That's just basic kind of politics. And so I know WABA, is represented in Annapolis by a lobbyist, and that kind of front end work, like, hey, who do we have? So I have a member on my committee from Harford County. That front end work, like, who's our most active bicycle advocate from Harford County? Well, let's get that person to come testify. That goes a long way to kind of personalize your advocacy.
Are there any other questions for the senator? I see a hand raised. John Corrin.
Hi, Senator Waldstreicher. First, let me thank you for your support. I'll say
John.
Past, present, and future. We appreciate it. This is our year for bikes on sidewalks. But the topic of my question is budget. This group has historically put most of its energy into all the things we've just been talking about, traffic safety laws to try to change behavior, and in some cases change infrastructure. But in a year like this, where the budget is under so much pressure, what else should we be doing? There have been years where we went to budget hearings for all of the MDOT modes. And this year it feels like maybe weighing in, not so much on the size of the pie, which is under so much pressure, but on how the pie is divvied up among modes. There's been some great comments in the chat here today about how the return on investment on bike and walk infrastructure is so much greater than on road infrastructure. Any guidance you have on how we can help shape the budget?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And for those of you who haven't seen John testify in Annapolis, you should come down and watch John, because John is an expert at what he does. And indeed, we're going to pass bikes on sidewalks this year. That's my bill, and Dana Jones on the House side, although it's possible Dana Jones is coming to join us in the Senate side. So we'll need a new House sponsor. Shanika Henson may also be coming over, or maybe the alternative to come over from the Senate, just to give her a shout out as well. So John, kind of sticking with our theme here tonight, it's always stronger and easier to advocate on behalf of a project than it is on behalf of a theoretical funding. And so talking about a pot and say, here's our road safety pot is not as effective or sexy or meaningful as talking about, here are the projects that are currently in process that come out of that pot. And then talking to the members who represent those areas where those projects are happening. It doesn't even have to be projects where the shovel is in the ground, where they're already building. It could be some future project, but just having that project's constituency advocate on its behalf. Here's why this bike lane is important to me. Here's why this park that's getting built is important to me. Here's why this path that's rail to trail is important to me. And so those kind of community-based activists who will benefit from these projects are going to be the most powerful advocates on its behalf.
Great, thank you.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming, particularly Jeff, who is my state senator, fortunately, for agreeing to join us tonight. I want everybody who's has a question that they think of after we're done here tonight to feel free to reach out to me, Peter at waba.org, or to any of the other WABA staff to ask your questions. We will be sure to respond. I also want to tell people that there's a meeting that happens during the session pretty much every Monday night. If you are interested in joining that conversation, sort of the ins and outs, inside baseball of what's going on during the session, feel free to send me an email and let me know, and I will put my email in the chat so that everybody has it. But I thank everybody who came tonight. I think this has been hopefully informative for everybody.
I have one more thing to add, but yeah.
And I will let Seth have the last word.
Okay, so the last word is on a slide in a second, which is you're invited, if you are a WABA member, to a WABA member happy hour in Hyattsville, a holiday happy hour. That is not too far from the Montgomery County border, noting that not everyone here is from Prince George's. So this is a WABA member event. And if you're not a member or you're a lapsed member, I'll refer you to the last line on this slide, which is that you can rejoin or join WABA today. Very simple URL, waba.org/join. We need your support to carry out the kind of work that you've heard about tonight and a lot more. And we do have a pay what you can membership level, so you can join for $5 a year, or if you are feeling flush, you can contribute a lot more. But we would love to have you as a member to boost our count, and as well as to have you participate in our activities, including the lobbying and everything else. So if you would like to attend the holiday party on December 11th, you can respond at bit.ly/PGC1211, and we would love to see you there and have you join. So I guess now we're ready to wrap up, and I will say on behalf of Peter and Callie and Kevin, our Virginia organizer who's on, thank you for joining us, and we really look forward to continuing to work with you. And thank you very much, especially to Senator Jeff Waldstreicher, Vice Chair of Judicial Proceedings, for taking the time to meet with us this evening.
Good night, everybody.